Well, good evening, everybody. It's really good to have you with us tonight again for session 2 of this Holocaust course that we're doing to try and educate everybody. Somebody's just trying to Skype me then, I'm sorry. To try and bring some level of education to a wider audience, particularly in the church. So that's our aim, and that's what I'm trying to do from my home in North Wales, and trying to get to a place where we can have a reasonable understanding of the background to the Holocaust, as well as what happened during Holocaust. And I was really pleased to see that some of you enjoyed the course last week, and tonight we're going to add the facility to the presentation in the form of questions. So if you want to ask questions, use the chat on the right hand side of your screen and give me questions, and for the last quarter of an hour we will try and answer those questions, or I will try and answer those questions the best I can. So I want to begin where we finished off last week, and that is where we just mentioned that in 1933, when Hitler came to power, there were 9 million Jews throughout Europe, in areas including Germany and those areas that would be occupied by Nazi Germany during the war. At the end of the war, over 2/3 of those Jews had been killed, and there was just a third left. It was a complete attempt at the genocide of the Jewish people of Europe. But we're going to look at, in a bit more depth about those figures now. And as you know, the screen that's in front of me, my computer screen, is the screen that has my notes on it. So I do look down, and I hope that doesn't distract you at all. But let me give you some figures for the populations of Jews who were in various countries throughout Europe in 1933, when Hitler came to power. So we get a bit of a background as to the population and Jewish communities in Europe at that time. In the Soviet Union, there were 2,525,000 Jews. That's a huge population of Jews, but it was still smaller than Poland, which had 300,000 Jews. And Poland was the place where most of the death camps were created and built. In Romania, there was 980,000 Jews. In Germany, there was 565,000 Jews, so considerably smaller than the Soviet Union and Poland. In Spain, there were just 4,000 Jews and nearly 2,000 in Portugal, so there weren't so many. In Lithuania, there were 185,000 Jews, and Latvia, 95,000 Jews. So there were various figures for the Jewish population depending on the country that was to be occupied. And of course, Hitler had all those. In Yugoslavia, there were 70,000. In Bulgaria, there were 60,000. So there were quite substantial communities of Jews in those cities, in those countries rather. Now in the cities, I'm going to just give you some figures for how many Jews were in each city. In Moscow, there were 250,000 Jews. In Lodz, there were 230,000 Jews. And as you know, there was a ghetto at Lodz, but there was ghettos in a lot of areas. In Budapest, there was 201,000 Jews in the city. In Bucharest, there was 95,000. Paris had 200,000 Jews. Amsterdam, 74,500. And Berlin, 82,000 Jews. So each city had a fairly large population of Jews who were actually part of the community and played a leading role in some cases, and were the backbone of the community in other cases. Now, in 1950, when the numbers of Jews that were counted at the end of the war, in Poland, which had 300,000 Jews, as I mentioned, there were just 45,000 Jews left. In Romania, there was 280,000 Jews. And in the Soviet Union, there were 2 million Jews left out of that population of nearly 3 million Jews. In France, there was 235,000 Jews left, and in Germany, just 37,000 Jews. So there was a complete reduction in the number of Jews in those countries due to simply the masses of the population of Jews being murdered by the Nazi government. Now, German troops entered Austria on March the 12th, 1938, and with the enthusiastic support of most of the Austrian population, Germany annexed the country the next day, an event known as Anschluss. Nazi leadership quickly implemented anti-Semitic laws against the 192,000 Austrian Jews. Tens of thousands of Austrian Jews lined up at the US consulate in Vienna to apply for immigration visas to the United States as the German army came into the country. President Roosevelt combined the US immigration quotas for Germany and Austria to give greater immigration opportunities to Austrian Jews. The State Department could then issue a maximum of 27,370 visas per year for immigrants born in those two countries. By June the 30th, 1938, however, nearly 140,000 people on the German quota were still waiting on the list for US immigration visas. Now, the question that arises by that statement is that why was it that America only wanted immigration from Austria and Germany? Well, the answer is simple, and it's an answer that I'm going to give fuller later on in the course in perhaps 3 or 4 weeks' time. It's to do with eugenics. President Roosevelt, and in fact Winston Churchill himself, were supporters of the eugenics movement. And in America, it was believed by the eugenics leadership, who were heavily financed, that Italian Jews, Czechoslovakian Jews, and Jews from Eastern Europe were substandard. They were humanly not able to live life to the full, and America said that they would be dependent on American aid to look after them while they stayed in the country in America. So they barred Jews from those countries from entering, and the immigration for Jews from Europe prior to the war beginning was restricted to German and Austrian Jews. And actually, that was the case for Great Britain as well, because we see with the Jews coming into the country, into the UK, that they were restricting Jews only from Germany and Austria. Now, I can't say at this stage with my research that it was based on simply eugenics, but because I haven't got any evidence to say that, but I can say categorically that America based their immigration policy for Jews from Europe on eugenics. But what is it? I have an interesting book here, and I'm going to bring some books for you to see tonight, so that if you want to, you can buy them. The immigration policies of Whitehall between 1933 and 1948 have been investigated by a lady called Louise London. And she's written a book called Whitehall and the Jews, which is an extremely good book. So she talks about immigration, but she doesn't mention eugenics. Now, whether she's aware of the eugenics background, I don't know. I've yet to contact her to ask her. But certainly in America, we can say that only German and Austrian Jews were of the caliber, if you like. This is in American terms, which enabled America to use those Jews rather than what they said would be a burden if they were to have the immigration of Jews from other countries in Eastern Europe. So now I'm going to mention some different aspects of Holocaust, different incidents or occasions that took place dotted around in the history of Holocaust that you should be familiar with if you're studying Holocaust at all. And the first conference that took place in regard to the immigration of Jews was the Evian Conference, which was on the 6th and 15th of July 1938 at Evian-les-Bains, a spa town in France. And this conference was a conference called by Roosevelt himself to bring together 32 countries of the world, because Nazi Germany, and Hitler in particular, had asked for other European countries, and America in particular, to take Jewish refugees that were already building up in the eastern part of Europe and in Germany, and they were moving around Europe, and Hitler wanted to get rid of them, and he asked Roosevelt to take these Jews, and Roosevelt called this conference at Evian to discuss with these other 32 countries what to do with the Jews. However, the United States and other countries, including our own, because we have representatives there, were unwilling to ease the immigration restrictions in respect of the Jewish refugees. Most countries feared that an increase in refugees would have caused further economic hardships on them in their own countries, with the exception of the Dominican Republic. And they were actually paid to take some of the Jews by the other countries. But the Evian Conference was not a successful conference for the Jewish people, but for Hitler in a sense, because he wanted to get rid of the refugees. But it certainly wasn't helpful for the Jewish community, because all those countries who could have taken vast numbers of Jews failed to do so. Although in Great Britain, we did take Austrian and German Jews, we took 60,000 of those Jews into our country, but that was dependent on sponsorship and support from family members here, and on their qualifications and their education as well. So there were restrictions, and as I say, Louise London's book puts some meat on the bones there. But that first thing to make a note of tonight is the Evian Conference, and if you get onto Google, you can look at that in much more detail. But you will see that these 32 countries had an opportunity to take Jews before the war started, but refused to do so. The next important event in Holocaust is something called Kristallnacht, which is in German for Night of Broken Glass. And this was on the 9th and 10th of November, 1938. Nazi leaders unleashed a series of pogroms against the Jewish population in Germany and recently incorporated territories. So there was an attack on Jewish communities in Germany and places like Czechoslovakia and Austria that had just been taken over by the Germans. This event came to be called Kristallnacht because of the shattered glass that littered the streets after the vandalism and destruction of Jewish-owned businesses, synagogues, and homes. And the night began with an instruction by different leaders in different councils and different areas of government, including the police and army, to attack Jewish homes, shops, and businesses on this particular night, and to destroy the books and burn the synagogues and arrest Jews as well, because there were 30,000 Jewish males arrested and taken to concentration camps. Not only did the police and army cause the damage and cause the arrest, but rioters were encouraged, and hundreds of synagogues and institutions throughout Germany, Austria, and other parts of Germany were burned down, not only by police and army, but by local people rioting. Many synagogues burned throughout the night in full view of the public and local firefighters, and nobody helped the Jewish people. And they were given orders not to prevent the flames from spreading to nearby buildings. Hitler's stormtroopers and youth members across the country were part of this attack on Jewish communities, with an estimated 7,500 Jewish-owned commercial establishments looted and destroyed. Jewish cemeteries became a particular object of desecration in many regions. In the aftermath of Kristallnacht, the Nazi regime ordered the Jewish community to pay 1 billion Reichsmarks as atonement tax, and rapidly enacted many anti-Jewish laws and edicts if they didn't pay. So for all the damage and the cost to the government for causing the damage and attacks on the Jewish communities, then the Reich ordered the Jewish communities to pay, and that was for 1 billion Reichsmarks. So the Jewish communities had to gather that money together, otherwise they were further persecuted. In the weeks that followed Kristallnacht, further laws and decrees were created to deprive Jews of their property and of their means of livelihood. Many of these laws enforced Aryanization policy, the transfer of Jewish-owned enterprises and property to Aryan ownership. Now, when I say Aryan ownership, I think most of you will understand what I'm saying, but some of you may not. An idea was created in America in the 1920s that America wanted a Nordic race of people to rule America and to be the majority of people there. They were anti-Negro, they were anti-coloreds, they were anti-Jewish, and they wanted a pure race. And the eugenics movement in the 1910, 1920s used the term Nordic race. And what that meant was that they wanted the rulership to be of a people from a Nordic background. So blonde hair, blue eyes, tall and strong. They didn't want people from another background to be part of the growth in America. And Hitler, and we're going to go into some detail later on, Hitler was aware of this when he was in prison in 1923, writing Mein Kampf. But he changed the name from Nordic to Aryan, which means exactly the same thing. If you like, background, not Middle Eastern or Greek or Italian, an Aryan type of person. And when I say Aryan during the course, that's what I mean. But it wasn't an idea just created by Hitler and his allies. It was a term created by America, who used the word Nordic, but it's the same thing in Hitler's terms, Aryan. And the businesses transferred from Jewish ownership after Kristallnacht to Aryan ownership. So if you were a German, Austrian, not Jewish, not from Italian background, not from Eastern European background, then you had a chance to take ownership of Jewish businesses. Ensuing legislation also barred Jews already ineligible for employment in the public sector from practicing most professions in the private sector. The legislation made further strides in removing Jews from public life. German education officials expelled Jewish children still attending German schools. German Jews lost their right to hold a driver's license, for instance, or to own a car. Legislation restricted access to public transport. Jews could no longer gain admittance to German theaters, to movie cinemas, or concert halls. This was 1938. Between November 1938 and 1939, 10,000 Jewish children were allowed temporary visas to reside in the UK. And this is called the Kindertransport. Home Secretary Sir Samuel Hoare agreed to speed up the immigration process by issuing travel documents on the basis of group lists rather than individual applications. Strict conditions were placed on the entry of the children. Jewish and non-Jewish organizations funded the operation and had to ensure that none of the refugees would become a financial burden on the public. Every child had a guarantee of over £50, for £50 actually, to finance their eventual re-emigration to another country, either Israel or America. But the intention was for those Jewish children not to remain in the UK. It was assumed at the time that the danger was temporary in Europe and the children would return to their families when it was safe to do so. Adult family members could not accompany the children. The last known Kindertransport from the Netherlands left on the 14th of May 1940, the day the Dutch army surrendered to Germany. By 1939, Britain had given temporary resident visas to 60,000 Austrian German adults who entered the the United Kingdom, financially sponsored, as I've mentioned. So in total, we have a refugee influx of Jews of 70,000 altogether, which is just a minute number. Now, some good books on the story of Jewish refugees are available for you to read. And one good book that I started off reading many years ago was a book by the head of, or one of the directors of the Jewish Refugee Association, or Association of Jewish Refugees. His name is Anthony Grenville, and he wrote a really good book on Jewish refugees between 1938 and 1948. The author is Anthony Grenville. On the 20th of January 1942, in a district of Berlin called Wannsee, Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the Nazi SS, chaired a conference of an elite group of Nazi leaders to ensure the coordination of the genocide of all Jews who came under Nazi occupation. Now, that was 1942. And as I said, we're just looking at different aspects of what happened in Holocaust. You can look at who attended that conference if you go to www.jewishvirtuallibrary.org, Wannsee Conference attendees. That's www.jewishvirtuallibrary.org/Wannsee Conference -attendees. And most of those attendees were actually medical doctors. Now, at this Wannsee conference, there was a list of countries and the numbers of Jews in those countries who were to be arrested and eliminated under the what came to be known as the final solution. And you can look for that list. If you look at Wannsee Conference and look at and Google that and look for the list of countries that were targeted by Nazi Germany for the elimination of the Jewish people, then you'll get that on the internet. And I've got the list in front of me. I've got a copy here, which tells me that in England, there were 330,000 Jews who were on the target list of Nazi Germany. And there are 330,000 Jews still here today, praise God, because Hitler didn't get here. But had he got here, he would have been able to have taken control of the Jewish community here as well. And it was a strange thing about the Jewish community here is that the Jews that came in from Austria and Germany were actually put in internment camps in Huyton in Liverpool and in the Isle of Man as the war started, because they were seen as foreign aliens. And they were already in camps. So Jews who came, Germans who came over, had they have got to the UK, would have already found Jews already in camps, and it would have been an easy process to arrest them and eliminate them, which is what their intention was. And on this list, you'll see the numbers of Jews in the countries that I spoke about earlier on. And the whole intention was that Hitler would have under his command concentration camps, death camps, which would murder in total not just 6 million Jews, and I shouldn't say just, but not 6 million Jews, but 11 million Jews in total. And they obviously would include the Jews from the UK as well. So it's worth having a look at that list. Another incident that we should be aware of when we're looking at Holocaust is the Bermuda Conference, which took place on the 19th of April 1943, and it was a week-long conference. between the USA and UK diplomats. It was held in a town called Hamilton in Bermuda. The purpose of the conference was to discuss the Jewish refugee problem in Europe in light of the already 2 million murders of Jews that had taken place. The Nazi regime had offered to release Jewish refugees from the occupied territory. And America and the UK got together in Bermuda to discuss what they should do about this proposal from the Nazi regime to the UK and the US about releasing Jews to those countries. And the discussions in Bermuda surrounded this evacuation proposal by Hitler. At the close of the conference, it was decided to decline the help they needed and increase the USA and UK quotas for refugees. Sorry, not to increase the US and UK quotas for refugees. And as a result, the killing had continued. Now, the discussions are available for you online, some of them. The purpose, as I say, of this conference was to see whether the UK and the USA would take these Jewish refugees, and particularly from Eastern Europe. So already 2 million Jews had been killed in the killing fields, and this was at the time when the death camps were being created, but also when masses of thousands and thousands of Jews were dying in ghettos and camps. And we were offered the opportunity to take some of those Jews and bring them into our own countries, but we refused them. I looked at some debates that took place in Parliament at the time, and there was one MP who said my constituents wouldn't want to take in Jews at any cost because they won't milk cows on a Saturday. So there was a lot of bad feeling against Jewish people, and the British government and the American government didn't want to increase the quotas for immigration. So the Bermuda Conference fell flat, and the continued killing of millions of Jews in Europe carried on regardless. The Nazis and their allies ran more than 44,000 camps, ghettos, and other sites of detention, persecution, and forced labor, and murder during the Holocaust. So we kind of think, don't we, of the 6 camps, death camps in Poland, and those the famous camps that often people visit: Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Bergen-Belsen, etc. But actually, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem are gathering information which shows us that there were actually 44,000 camps in ghettos and other sites of detention of Jews right throughout German occupied territory during the war. So the numbers that we're talking about are vast, and the targets are very clear. That the targets were the Jewish people, and it just didn't happen out of nothing. This was a planned extermination of the Jewish people that went back to the 1920s and before that. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at how did it begin. And I'm going to not just go back to the 1920s and 30s. I'm going to go right back 2,000 years to the beginning of Christendom, where we see the first followers of Yeshua were Jews and considered themselves to be a Jewish sect. In the first 100 years of Christendom, those people who followed Yeshua, whether Jews or Gentiles, were just considered another part of the Jewish communities, but a sect of Jewish communities, and a particular sect that believed that Yeshua was the Messiah. However, things changed. From the 2nd century onwards, the early church fathers, persuaded by the Roman emperors, whose religion was polytheistic, they were pagans, and included Mithraism, despised Jews and Judaism. Now, at this point, I want to just recommend some more books to you. One little book that I read many years ago, and I actually was taught by this man, Franklin H. Littell. He wrote a book called Crucifixion of the Jews, and that gives you some of the background. I have another book here, which is The Holocaust and the Christian World. That's a really good book. That has quotes from Victoria Barnett and Stephen Haynes, some of the Holocaust historians write in that book. That's a really good book. That's The Holocaust and the Christian World. All these books are worth reading. I love reading these books. So, we see that David Ketzer wrote a book called The Popes Against the Jews, where you get a lot of background from that book as well. And also My Father's Anti-Semitism, The Hatred of the Jews by Michael Berenbaum. It speaks more about contemporary anti-Semitism, but actually he quotes some of the history as well. And another good book which will speak about the history of the church and the Jews is The German Christian Movement in the Third Reich, and that's by Doris L. Bergen. And we can't go far wrong either reading Susanna Heschel's book on the Christian theologians in Nazi Germany. And she speaks about the contemporary anti-Semitism in Germany. One last book as well. Anthony Scalino, who is a judge a retired judge now in the States, has written another book detailing some of the Christian anti-Semitism that we're going to look at now as well. And then I've got another book here. The last book I'm going to recommend at this moment is one by a guy called Michael S. Fryer. It just gives you some background to Christian anti-Semitism leading up to and during the Holocaust. So you might want to read that book as well. I don't know who that guy is, by the way. So back to the story from the 2nd century, and many of you actually know some of this background from doing the Hidden Treasures course and studying yourselves this Christian history. So we're looking at the background to Holocaust. Barnabas himself, who was an early church writer who lived from 130 AD onwards, he wrote in 138. Sorry, after 138, he wrote, "As a people, the Jews are wretched men who were abandoned by God because of their ancient idolatry. Many Christians were celebrating the festivals of God then, the appointed feasts, the Sabbath, and also the feast, Passover through to Tabernacles. But Barnabas made every effort in his writings to remove people from what he called Judaizing, because he actually hated the Jewish people. And he wrote this, I got his date of birth wrong, I'm sorry, he wrote this between 130 and 138 AD. Then we see church councils, and I'm leaving out a lot of information out here because the information is in those books as well, and you could get it from the Hidden Treasures course. But one of the church councils, a council of Laodicea in 363 AD, that said this about the Jewish people: Christians must not Judaize, become like Jews by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's Day, an institution the bishops have made to align themselves with the state, because no believing citizens worked on a Saturday and worshipped on the Sunday. And then the council said, and if they can, resting then as Christians, but if they shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be an anathema to Christ. So anyone who kept the Sabbath or kept the worship system of the Jews was an anathema from Christ. And an anathema, if you were accused of being an anathema in the 4th century, you were beheaded. Then there was the Synod of Gerona in 1078, which required Jews to pay taxes to support the church. The Third Lateran Council, 1179, prohibited certain medical care to be provided by Christians to Jews. And as you listen to this and look at the implications of this, you'll see that Hitler, with the Nuremberg laws, which we're going to look at soon, actually pretty well copied what the church had already said previously. The Fourth Lateran Council, 1215, required Jews to wear special clothing to distinguish themselves from Christians. So this is the process of polarization that we discussed last time when we looked at the stages of genocide. The Church Council of Oxford in 1222 ordered all Jews to wear a yellow star above their left breast on their clothing. So you can see Hitler didn't create that as an idea. That was created by the Church Council in Oxford in 1222. And then the Council of Basel, 1431 to 1443, forbade Jews to attend universities from acting as agents in the conclusion of contracts between Christians, and required that they attend church sermons. So Jews were forbade from attending universities, etc. And these are all Christian organizations, Christian councils that impacted the Jewish community in an adverse way. And in this Council of Basel, Jews were forced to attend church services, and they had to sit in the pews in the front, and they were scourged and spoken of and vilified badly because they weren't believers, and they were forced to make confessions of faith. Now, when I studied at Yad Vashem, not only did I have the privilege of studying with Ephraim Kay and Steffi Kay and many others, but they brought over from America Franklin H. Littell, who I mentioned, and I recommend his book, Crucifixion of the Jews. And I asked him, what was the significance of all these church councils and these things which created hatred towards the Jews in the minds of Christians? And he said, well, it was a triumph of paganism over the Christian movement of the day, and it caused the bishops to serve the state and not the church, and it was bad for the Jews. Again, this polarization takes place. And we see from what Franklin H. Little is saying is that the atmosphere of the church at the in those early years, and also the years just before the Holocaust, which we're going to look at very soon, was such that in the eyes of Christians, Jews were absolutely hated. And the bishops who led the Christian communities were actually servants of the state and not the church. So they didn't serve God, and they led the people into a place where the people absolutely hated Jews. And we're going to look in more details of that. And when you look at Christian art in those early years, you see that Jews are described as being people who are hated, devil's advocates, etc. So we see that those attitudes actually filtered into Europe and America in the late 1890s and 1900s. And this is the area that I really think is significant for us. The area leading up to that is very important, of course, but I want to, because it's Holocaust, I want to focus on the years just prior to the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and also the years during which Hitler grew up, because those years are special in a young person's life in formulating ideas, and those early years in life. And Hitler certainly was impacted by the virulent anti-Semitism which took place in Austria, and particularly in Vienna, where he grew up. Austria being a particularly Catholic country, but also in Germany, Christians from the evangelical movements and the traditional churches in Germany, the Reformed churches, the Lutheran churches after the Reformation, they also were particularly anti-Semitic. But I want to look at Hitler's early years and what influenced him to become such a rabid anti-Semite. First of all, I think we need to look at Clara Hitler. Clara was a pious Catholic in that she was a devoted Catholic. Hitler was devoted to her. She died of breast cancer at the age of 47 on December the 21st, 1907. This had a massive impact on Hitler himself because he really loved Clara. And Hitler visited the grave of his parents on the 12th of March 1938, the day he followed his troops as they invaded Austria. So Hitler, when he entered Austria, the first thing he did was go to his mother's grave and his father's grave. So what about Clara? Why do I introduce Clara? Well, I think one of the most influential people in our lives are our mothers and fathers, and what they say have an impact on us and stay with us as we grow up. And I'm sure you've all got examples of that taking place in your own life, where your mother has said something about someone and or a person or an organization, and that stayed with you, and that has formulated an opinion in your mind. So what would Clara have learned, being a pious Catholic, a faithful Catholic, going to church regularly in Vienna and coming home and sharing what the priest or the minister had said in the pulpit with her family? Well, we need to know what the attitude of the church was during Clara's upbringing. Well, in August 1871, Pope Pius IX spoke to a female gathering and told them how they should feel about Jews, because he had an opinion about Jews. And what he said was this: before the time of Jesus, Jews had been the children of God, but all this had changed owing to their obstinacy and their failure to believe. We have in Rome today these people everywhere, and there are too many of these dogs. We hear them barking in the streets, going about molesting people everywhere. His attitude towards Jews was that they were dogs, and that was the general attitude, not only in the Catholic Church in Austria and Germany, but also in the Lutheran Reformed churches as well. Now, the priests also had the same attitude, and that is recorded in different church magazines. And one of those is the La Civiltà Cattolica, and it was a Jesuit bi-weekly founded in 1850. It influenced politics as well as the thoughts of its readers. Articles instilled fear and a need for protection against Jews, because Jews were, in the minds of churchgoers, some groups of people who were to be feared. In short, making Jews enemies of Catholics and governments. One edition of the La Civiltà Cattolica said this in 1880. Jews were obligated by their religion to hate non-Jews. As a consequence, Christians despise them. Societies have to protect themselves from the Jews, and governments would be well advised to introduce exceptional laws for a race that is so exceptionally and profoundly perverse. So what we have here is a statement in a magazine, a Catholic magazine, which says that laws should be made to restrict the lives of Jews. Where did Hitler get that idea from about restricting the lives of Jews? In 1920, an edition of Civiltà Cattolica, the publication, it again said that Jews were the filthy element who were avid for money. This is a Catholic paper. Now, Father Areglia, a writer for the newspaper, compared Jews to wolves, and that and said that they should not be set free. In the 1920s, Father Enrico Rossa, a veteran journalist described as an intrepid champion of the directives of the Holy See, wrote this. He said, the Jews were to blame for the Russian Revolution as they had been for the French Revolution, and as they have been for the most recent one in Hungary, with all of its massacres, cruelty, and savage horrors. The result has been the collapse of the Muscovite Empire and the tyranny imposed by the Bolshevist takeover, which remains in Europe. And Jews were accused of being leaders in the Bolshevik movement, which was anti-democracy, it was communist. And Father Enrico Rosso actually made it clear that Jews were a danger to the church and also to the European governments. Now, in 1922, Civiltà Cattolica published an article from their Austrian correspondent, which said that if Jews had their way in Austria, this is what they said, Vienna, Vienna will be nothing but a Judaic city. Property and houses will all be theirs. The Jews will be the bosses and the gentlemen and the Christians their servants. Austria will be absolutely the subject, tributary, and slave to the Jews, or it will not exist at all. What a frightening thing for the people of Vienna to believe that they were going to be thrown out of their houses and they were going to lose their property and their businesses to Jews because Jews were wanting to take over the whole city. Now, this is a city where Clara would have gone to church and she would have read these articles. She would have been taught about the Jewish people from the clergy and the pulpit. What would she have gone home and said if these things were being written in the Catholic press and spoken of in the pulpit? She'd have gone home and said exactly what these papers and clergy had said, that Jews were a danger to society, that they were an evil, that they were an underclass, that they were communists, they were trying to take over, they were trying to compel non-Jewish people to give up their homes and businesses. That's what she would have said at the dinner table. And that would have been soaked in by her son, Adolf. And he would have been influenced by that, and he would have built on that attitude. And he did build on that attitude towards Jews, because he wrote a book that we all, most of us are very familiar with, called Mein Kampf. And he wrote Mein Kampf when he was in prison between 1923 and 1925, about his thoughts for Germany and Austria and the idea of eliminating the Jews of Europe. Now, he didn't use the term elimination in that way, but Hitler had been interested in the eugenics movement in America for some years. And he actually, whilst he was in prison, wrote to eugenicist leaders in America and asked for papers and documents which would help him formulate a eugenics program for not only the Jews of Germany and Austria, but also for the mentally handicapped or the people who were epileptic, etc., and or physically impaired. And he was, by that time, very involved in the eugenics movement in America, in that he was reading all the documents and the books, etc., that were being published in America at that time. And he said this in Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, the word Mein Kampf is my struggle. He said, today, I believe that I am acting in accordance with the Almighty Creator by defending myself against the Jew. I am fighting for the word of the Lord. Now, A lot of people are saying today that Hitler was into the occult, and that's why he he wanted to murder Jews, etc. But I can't see any evidence of that at all. Hitler wanted to murder Jews because he grew up an anti-Semite. He was a man filled with hatred. He was a dangerous maniac. But he was also influenced by the eugenics movement in America. And we're going to look at that later on in the course, but in a deeper way. But his ideas were already formulated by his mother, by the church, and also by the eugenics movement in America, which was again anti-Semitic. But he also was influenced by people of his era and contemporaries and people who led the governments in places like Vienna, where he grew up. One of the most influential people in his life was a man called Paul Anton de Lagarde. He was a Bible scholar who died in 1891. And Hitler much admired him as one of the founding fathers of Germany's pre-war anti-Semitism. Lagarde was an extreme anti-Semite. Lagarde advocated a national form of Christianity. He was a Christian, purged of any elements of Judaism or Jewish references. He said Jews should be destroyed as speedily as possible, as they were nothing more than pests or parasites. Now, he was one of Hitler's mentors, if you like, or heroes. Another one was Karl Lueger, who died in 1910 in Austria. And he was the former mayor of Vienna and the leader of the Austrian Christian Social Party. Hitler greatly admired Lueger, regarding him as the greatest burgomaster of all time. In 1887, Lueger made a strong anti-Semitic speech in which he supported a government bill aimed at preventing immigration of Jews fleeing the pogroms in Russia and Romania. At that time, from 1880 through to 1910, there were pogroms, attacks on Jewish communities in Russia, based on something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and we're going to just mention those a bit later on. And these protocols created hatred for the Jewish communities in Russia and Poland, and Jews were fleeing there. But Lueger made it very clear that Jews should not be allowed to flee those pogroms, and should not be allowed into Germany or Austria. Again, another rabid anti-Semite. But also at the same period of time, or similar period of time, we have a particularly strong anti-Semite within the Austrian Church, and that was Bishop Alois Hudal, an Austrian Catholic who died in May 1963. And he was in the 1920s fearless about what he said were the dangers of Austria's 220,000 Jews. Hudal said Nazi radicalism was equal to Christian teaching, and he affirmed Hitler's views. After the war, Hudal was actively involved in helping Nazi war criminals escape justice through what was termed the rat lines. Now, you can buy a book, I've got the book somewhere here, called The Rat Lines. And that was that's the evidence of the Catholic Church helping the Nazi leaders escape Nazi Germany after the war. And Hudal was part of that. But he created a lot of anti-Semitic feeling in Austria in the 1920s, and Hitler knew him well. On the 20th of July 1933, knowing the restrictions being placed upon Jews, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, a Vatican diplomat to Germany who became Pope during the war, signed an agreement with the Nazi Party. The pact, or the agreement called the Concordat, contained promises of the Roman Catholic support for the Reich in return for rights for the Roman Catholic Church in Germany. Now, Pacelli was the cardinal in Berlin at the time, 1933, not long after Hitler came to power, and he signed this agreement for a deal really with Nazi Germany that the Catholic Church would be protected. Basili became Pope during the war. He became the Pope, and he's accused of being silent and speaking, well, not speaking about the atrocities which he knew were taking place during the Holocaust, and he did very little, if anything, to support the Jewish communities and protect them from the terrible atrocities that they were facing, Italian Jews as well. And that's a whole new story, and you'll get that story in a little bit more detail from Anthony Scilenio's book called The Holocaust and the Church. That's a really good little book as well. So now again, 1933, in April 1933, Bishop Otto Diabelius of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Prussia declared, shortly after the boycott of Jewish businesses, this is with the laws that took place about boycotting Jewish businesses, that he had always been an anti-Semite. And Diabelius said this, he said, "One cannot fail to appreciate that in all the corrosive manifestations of modern civilization, Jewry plays a leading role." So you can see that there's a huge amount of Christian anti-Semitism from both Catholic and Lutheran churches that actually affected the thoughts and opinions of not only the politicians in Germany, not only the churches in Germany, but also the ordinary people in Germany and Austria, which enabled them to create in their minds the idea that the Jewish people were subhuman. They were not worthy. They were a danger to German society. And those ideas came from within Christendom during that time, and also the eugenics movement in America. So I'm going to stop there now, and I'm going to ask you if you want to ask any questions at this point, and I'll try and answer them for you, because the whole question of the history of Holocaust is being investigated by amazing journalists throughout the world, investigators, historians throughout the world. And we're now starting to bring all this information, collate it all together and look at it with a wider view. And I think one of the views that I strongly hold is that Hitler had in his mind anti-Semitism planted by the church and by his parents and the people around him. The idea that Jews were a danger was given to him through his peers, through the people around him. In 1933, he was also 1923, when he was writing Mein Kampf in prison, he was already formulating ideas of sterilizing Jews, castrating Jews, looking at ways of stopping them, in his terms, breeding, and in Americans' terms, breeding. So he was influenced by other people in other countries in that way. And then he had that strong input from the churches that Jews were a danger to society. That would be in 1933, 1934 onwards. So if you have any questions, and if you'd like to ask me, I'll try and answer them the best way I can before we move on to next week's presentation, which will continue with some of the things that were happening around Europe with regards to Nazism, and we'll look at what the church continued to do during the period in the couple of years before the war and during the war. Now, I've got a question from Leonie. Thanks, Leonie. She says, why did Hitler go to prison? Well, Hitler was a political activist. He fought in the First World War, and he was actually in hospital in the First World War as a result of injuries. But when he came out, he joined the German Socialist Party, and there was a lot of unrest in Germany as a result of poverty, as a result of the economy. People were very poor. They were the German people were paying reparation payments to France and the UK and Belgium for the damage that they caused during the First World War. So there was a lot of bad feeling. And Hitler was an activist, and he was placed in prison because of his activism. And that's where he sat down and he formulated all these opinions that have been given to him by various leaders, etc. And he put it into this book called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And that's when he studied the eugenics movement and other movements as well, other political movements. And he called it the years of his university, because he wasn't an educated man in terms of schooling, but he was, after his imprisonment, he studied quite a lot and studied other attitudes. So that's why he was in prison. He was a political prisoner, Leonie. I don't know if anybody else has another question, but I have a copy of Mein Kampf. I don't advise that people read it as a book, but it is good for me as a reference book, because I can take the quotes from him. But the sad thing about Mein Kampf is it's being reprinted now, and people shouldn't buy it, really. So I've got this one from, I think it's from you, Becky, is it? It's Father's House. It says, I believe Hitler was influenced by music he listened to. Mike, do you believe this to be true? Well, I don't know the answer to that. He's may well have liked music. I really don't know, but I think the major influences on his life were religious, in terms of de-Judifying the church, getting Jews out of the church, and that was something that was taken up by the German Christian movement later on, after 1933. Certainly influenced by that, and certainly influenced by the idea that there had to be a super race in Germany, an Aryan race, and that was based on what he'd learned from America. And so he was certainly influenced by those two things, and clearly the politics of the day as well drove him to leadership and want to take power, so that he could manifest these ideas of elimination or preventing the Jews having freedoms. And so that was his aim. He wanted to get power to accomplish these things, and that's what influenced him in regard to the Holocaust. Music, I don't know, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So what Becky's saying, sorry, should have elaborated. I think the artists, musicians were anti-Semitic. Well, absolutely. Most of the people who were creative in history, actually, and were connected to the church, many of them were anti-Semitic. I don't know whether you've read the book by Anthony Julius called The Jews in the Diaspora, but Anthony Julius has written this book to show us how Shakespeare was so anti-Semitic, and how he influenced people, and then art, Christian art and design in churches, such as the stained glass windows with synagogue and ecclesia in them, where you have synagogue in the stained glass windows of many medieval churches, done by artists who actually try and show that Jews have lost their place, and ecclesia has taken her place, and that's depicted in art. And obviously art in if we look at some of the musicians of the day, the composers, they were also anti-Semitic. So yes, I would guess that those sort of things influenced him as an overall picture of the Jewish people. But the main influences were the strong messages from the churches and the strong messages from the eugenicists that Jews were a subhuman race. So I hope I've answered that, Becky. Don't know if we've got another question. Well, I don't think we have. So can I just say thank you for listening tonight? I hope I've been able to impart some things that are of interest to you. I just want to give you a recommendation for another book which speaks of it speaks of the possible Holocaust in the Middle East as well. Had Hitler have taken control of the UK and moved out into the Middle East, because he deals with Middle Eastern leaders as well. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem being one of them. And also this book talks about the expulsion of Jews from Middle Eastern countries after the war as well. And this book is called Uprooted, and it's by Lynn Julius. This is an absolutely excellent book which speaks about Jews from the Middle East. So that's a really good book. I've got another question from Karen Doran. Could you please tell us the name of the author of The Crucifixion of the Jews, please? Yes. Karen, this is by Franklin H. Littell. The book is still available on Amazon. It's called Crucifixion of the Jews. And have I got it here? Easy at hand here? Yes, I have. That's it. That's it there. Franklin H. Littell. He died about 3 or 4 years ago. An excellent Christian man. He was a Methodist minister from Detroit and an expert on anti-Semitism. And he was one of the biggest people to oppose the anti-Semitic articles by Henry Ford, the anti-Semite who owned the Ford factory in Detroit. Another question from Karen, and also the Holocaust and the Christian world. Yeah, that's that one. It's reflections on the past and challenges for the future. The editors are Carol Rittner, Stephen Smith, and Irina Stenfeld. And that's the book there, Holocaust in the Christian World. I got that from Yad Vashem, but I think it probably is on Amazon. That's a really good book as well. So if there are no more questions, I want to say thank you so much for listening tonight, and we'll carry on with this story next week. But I want to interject next week and tell you a little bit about some of the things that were happening in the UK as well around the same time, so that we get a broader picture of what was going on. So thanks very much indeed, and have a good night. God bless. Laila Tov. Bye.